OK, let's speak to Douglas Murray, who's Director of the Centre for Social Cohesion. Good afternoon to you, Douglas.
Good afternoon. Good to be with you.
And good to have you here on the show, sir. What do you think about this idea of Manchester City Council closing schools, or at least proposing to close schools entirely because of religious festivals?
Well, I think there are two things here. Firstly, I mean, I've seen the report from Manchester Evening News, and I think it's slightly more complex than the story has been portrayed, in that they are presenting a way around what's obviously a difficult issue, and suggesting, I think, that teacher training days could coincide with holy days for Muslims.
But that's still children not being educated, which, after all, that's what they're going to school for.
Yeah, I mean, well, the point is that if the teacher training days could be put on these particular days, then they wouldn't be missing out on education. It would simply be a day that otherwise is elsewhere taken off for teachers to train. But I think there's a secondary part of the story, which is the larger debate about whether or not schools should take religious holidays depending on a certain percentage of their pupils being of a particular religious background.
Which is what Trey's point was, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think there is a really difficult issue here, because after all, what we hope to have in Britain in the 21st century is, a cohesive society in which people are treated equally, in which we have all sorts of variations on ideas and religious beliefs and backgrounds and so on. But there's a common culture which we orient around. It was actually a German Muslim, Bassam Tibi, who came up with the idea of a common culture, the central culture, which allows everyone else to have whatever religious and cultural beliefs they have and practice them. After all, Britain is probably the best country in the world to live in as a Muslim or any other religious minority.
Should children, though, Douglas, be allowed to take days off for religious festivals? After all, as we live in a multicultural society with a plurality of different religions and beliefs, we could end up being in a situation where, let's face it, children go to school for what, 38 weeks of the year, something like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are so many religions in Britain today, and it's great, but I mean, if every single religious holiday would have taken off, no kid would ever be in school.
Well, this is the point, isn't it?
That is very...
so should they just...
I think that, look, parents who want to take their children out for Eid or other religious holidays can currently already do so. It means their child misses a day of schooling, and I think that's highly regrettable. But it's their right to do that. I think that a much bigger problem emerges if we go down this route of saying, as has been proposed, I think that if 40% of pupils come from a particular religious background, then the whole school will have that dearth. I think, apart from anything else, this makes head teachers and educational authorities have to spend a lot of their time just focusing on the demographic swing within their schools. I'm not sure this is what I want educational authorities to be concentrating on.
Well, they have to do a yearly census, presumably, don't they, and then publish those results and then say, right,
And it also, I mean, the sort of more fundamental point, I think, that has to be stressed is that equality is what we hope for, is that people to be treated equally. And that means that we're really sort of blind to people's cultural and religious differences in important ways. And I think that what this does is and things like this, is that it actually accentuates difference. I hope that people are treated as British citizens, as British people, whatever their background and beliefs, and that's all, we're all the same. I hope that that's the message that comes out. But actually, things like this can do more to divide us than bring us together. They accentuate, for instance,
how do they divide us?
Been born to Muslim parents. I don't see why that means you should be treated differently all your life.
How does it divide us, Douglas?
Well, instead of treating us all the same, saying that we're all British, and so it says that you're from a Muslim background, and therefore you'll be treated in the following way around the following calendar. You're from a Hindu background, therefore you'll be. I actually there's a secularist I rather like Richard Dawkins' line that we should talk about, children of Muslim parents, children of Hindu parents, children of Christian parents, and stop describing children by the culture that they're born into. I hope we can just agree that we're all British and we find various ways to muck along.
Trey, would you agree with that?
I think, but then again, culture plays a huge role in who you are. And at the end of the day, if you feel as though your culture is being isolated, because at the end of the day, you're living in Britain, you're still under British culture, but you have this split heritage, and you're expected to look after both sides. And by saying that you know, you don't really have this and you're not supposed to be acknowledging it, I don't think it's going to help social cohesion. I think it'll separate us more, because then you'll want to be more with your own.
But Trey, if there is a school whereby, as Douglas said, 40% Muslim pupils or 40% Hindu or Sikh, and there is a Diwali, or isn't it better that all the kids stay in school and that you do something around that? Surely that would build social cohesion better than taking the child out of school.
No, but they're in school together anyway 300 odd or 230 odd days of the year. So that one day, I mean, even if you took the 5 or 4 major religions and you took their days, it might add an extra 6 days to the year that they're taking off. But do you not think from a cohesion perspective it would help to educate the young people more? Like in America.
But how can it if they're not there? How can it if they all just go back to their own people, of their own religion, their own cultural background? How does that help social cohesion?
If the schools or the education board made a concerted effort to make those days more about celebrating that whatever festival.
But how can they if they're not there?
Can I interject for a second? I was going to just agree with you, Nihal, on that. If the kids are not there, like I come from a Muslim background, and my parents took me out of school when there were certain events. And the next day I would go back, and the kids would say, well, why weren't you in? And it's difficult to explain.
Why?
When you're the same age. Yeah. Well, you don't have a full understanding of religion, I believe, when you're about 5 or 6 or 7. So trying to explain to another kid who's of that age, they don't understand what you're talking about.
Them, it's my Christmas, like we used to say, and it makes them understand that, okay, there are...
When you're that young...
Trey, wait a second, 1 second.
Sorry, when you're that young, Christmas is just presents and, you know, having a family dinner and things like that. You don't fully understand what Christmas means, and it's like that with every other religious day. And I think if your kids stayed in school at that time, and the school actually made an effort to explain to the kids in the school assembly or in some other way, you know, at the lunchtime they'll have a fair or something.
Right.
Like to explain what the event is, I think that would do better for cohesion of cultures.
Like an Eid Day or a Vaisakhi Day in the school.
Well, this is the point, isn't it? Imi, do you think that you would rather have had, as Trey just said, Vaisakhi Day in school and Eid Day in school and have been made to stay in school rather than being taken out?
Absolutely.
But then do you not think the other parents would find that more distressing? Right? For instance, would a bunch say there's a 60% or a 70% Christian advantage in that school, and then they said, no, we don't really want there to be an Eid Day because we feel our children are missing out on an education. Why don't you let the kids go home and celebrate with their families? You'll have the same kind of problem.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying.
It's also, it'd be very hard on a practical level to tell parents that they had to have their children in school on Eid and other days.
Yeah.
That's why the current kind of fudge that we have at the moment sort of works. They have the right to do it.
Well, does it work?
The discretion of the parents and the school.
Yeah, the discretion of parents. But, Douglas, does it work? If it was working, then Manchester City Council presumably wouldn't be thinking about shutting schools down because too many people are ducking out for religious festivals. I mean, they're saying that they don't want teachers working in half-empty classrooms.
Yeah, and that's very understandable. And as I say, if one of the things that Manchester appears to be suggesting, which is there's a way around this by coinciding religious festivals with teacher training days, and actually that the whole problem is sort of solved in a way. But if they can't do that, then yeah, of course it's bad for teachers to be teaching half-empty classes. But then you have to make the decision as a school whether or not that means that you have to formalise something that already works to some extent informally. Quite a lot of things in this area get through with a kind of fudge. I mean, you know, the schools would rather the pupils didn't get taken out for the day for religious holiday, but they can be. You know, in a way, for a lot of us, that sort of solution is often better than a kind of rigid system which councils and educational authorities often kind of attempted to put in place.
Well, Douglas, just being really hardcore for a second here, what would you really like to see happen?
What I'd like to see happen is that everyone is aware of the fact they can practice their faith in this. It is probably the most religiously free country and society in the world. But that we do have to bear in mind this thing that it only works because we are centered around a core culture, and that the thing that unites us is that we're British, and that among other things there is there's a common calendar which we work around. Now, variations on that are perfectly permissible, perfectly possible, and indeed happen at the moment.
But would you rather see...
we have to be very careful about this idea. I repeat that. We have to be very careful about the idea of saying that this is about different communities and making different communities get treated in different ways, because down that